Hello TCCTR students. My name is Mandy Melton. I'm a counselor at Trinity River campus, and I've been at Trinity River for the past 8 years. So if I've met you, it's good to connect with you again. I want to talk with you about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart today. I want to talk with you about resiliency and grit. And in the words of Maya Angelou, I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. I know there has been a great deal going on, and in fact, some of us feel like we're barely hanging in balance and that we're struggling through everything with COVID and the injustice that has recently occurred. Everything seems very unfair, and it's hard. It's hard navigating through that, but then it's even tougher because we're overwhelmed with transitions at home, with our family, and with school and work. So there's so much happening. And in fact, some of us just feel like we're teetering and we're just barely making it in some cases. We've had setbacks on the journey, some financial, some health-wise, and so many others. So that's why resiliency and grit are so important during this season. So I want to define resiliency for you for a moment. When we think about resiliency, we're talking about kind of a recoil, if you will. These are folks that are very adaptable by nature, and many times what has happened is they've gone through some very difficult seasons and traumatic events. These adapters are able to recoil. So what does that look like? I really like this visualization of the slinky. Do you remember playing with the slinky when you were a kid? And you'd get out the slinky and you'd throw it out and then it would recoil and come back. So I want you to get that particular vision in mind when we're talking about resilience. That's what resilience is like. You have that comeback power. And so that's what it's about. But let's talk about this part about adapting. So resilient folks are able to adapt. They're able to be flexible, and even though they've gone through a difficult road and a difficult season, they're able to come back. I like to think about the bamboo when I'm thinking about adapting. And you know, during the hurricane season especially, sometimes you'll hear about news coverage and the bamboo just literally has folded over. But after the hurricane season is over, everything is getting back and things are being restored, the bamboo is able to come back from that. And remember, I just told you a few minutes ago too, that people that actually endure trauma and crises are the ones that often have this comeback power. They've endured so much, and so they have that skill in their tool belt. I was listening to a TED Talk about trauma and resilience. Actually, it's done by a young man named Charles Hunt. And Charles tells his story about from when he was a small child and what he had to endure with his family all the way up to adulthood, and how he overcame and how he went on and got his bachelor's and master's degree. And so his story is very moving. At the very end of this, I'll make sure you have that resource available so you can listen to it. But it is one way that those kinds of narratives, if we can just get that in front of us, I think that's really important during this season. And it's definitely a powerful story about adapting. So what are some traits of adaptive people? Well, first and foremost, they are positive. They have a positive outlook on life. We've got the news talking to us. We've got social media over here. And so there's a lot coming at us. And there are times when it just feels like it's going to be overwhelming and it boils over. Sometimes we have to cut those things off. Doesn't mean that we don't listen to important reports or an informative information, but it means that we have to step away. We have to put that aside and not constantly look at our news feed. Developing realistic plans. So setting a plan in motion, writing those goals down. That can be a very powerful thing in your life. Locus of control, that's a huge one. When we're talking about locus of control, we're talking about there's an internal locus of control and there's an external locus of control. Internal says, I depend on myself for the successes and failures. I'm not looking to this external outside resource. I'm not going to let that impact me. The control is all yours. Strong communication, that's a huge one as well. Setting strong communication and, like I said, boundaries. Viewing yourself as a fighter rather than a victim. You know, it's easy in this season to say, I've been victimized. I've had this situation, this circumstance, this injustice, this health crisis, this financial situation. And you know what? You have been victimized. There's a lot going on, but that's where you don't need to stay there. You need to get back up and get back up to fight and to know that there are people that can come alongside of you, whether it's a counselor or your community, your church, your friends. There are resources available. Demonstrating high emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence doesn't mean that you let your emotions rule your life, but rather what it means is that you have an emotional understanding of things and you don't let anger or frustration or something be the driving point and center of your life. Of course, we all have to process the emotions we have, but we don't let that be the forefront of everything that we do. We don't let frustration drive us and anger drive us. So all of those things are important traits. I want to talk for a moment about grit as well. So there's a lot of great research out, actually by Dr. Duckworth, Angela Duckworth. She has a character lab online as well as information about grit, and it's very, very powerful because grit is something that we need as well. Grit is it's in the same family as resilience. So if we were talking about grit and resilience, they would be siblings. They're not the same thing, but they're definitely kin to each other. So let's talk about grit versus resilience for just a second. Grit is defined as a perseverance and passion for the long term, whereas resilience is more about recovery time. So that's kind of where you see the difference between the two. Now, what I like about grit is you may fall down, right? You may fall down, but you can find a way to get back up. And so again, it's for the long term, when you're thinking about grit for the long term. What I like about what Dr. Duckworth says is this: grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. And again, when you think about marathon, you think of for the long term. Passion and perseverance is what she's talking about there. I wanted to present also to you, there is a scale about grit that Dr. Duckworth has out on her website. And at the end of this presentation, there's a resource that you can click on to actually take her grit assessment. It's based on what we call a Likert scale, where it says, I really, really like to know this is not like me at all. And there's 8 questions that you can take. It's straight through her website. You take it, submit it, and it gives you the results right there on the spot. So it might interest you just to see kind of where you're at. So resilience and grit. You may not always have the answer to difficult problems, but you have a choice of how you see those issues and those circumstances. How we see things is very important. Our perspective. And so even when we're taking all the world in and everything that's happening, that's just boiling over right now with issues and problems and circumstances, we can take that in, but we don't have to let it impact us. And we can choose how we take it in. Grit and resiliency is something that I want you to be thinking about as you move forward and as you really focus on your next steps of what you're going to do. And I have some resources here for you. I specifically put Charles Hunt in. That is the TED Talk about trauma and resilience. I also have a couple of resources on resilience from psychology, APA psychology, and then Dr. Angela Duckworth's resources as well. And so I just want to encourage you. We want to come alongside you. We want to help and support you and be there for you. And this is just one piece of what I have to offer today to give you some encouragement and to empower you. Take these tools. We're here for you. And if you need us, you can reach out to us while we're operating remotely. Also, you can reach out directly to me if you would like to contact me. And My name, of course, is Mandy Melton. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed connecting with you today, even if it's in a remote way. I'm there with you and trying to come alongside you as much as I can. Take good care of yourselves and family.